now with Dr. Bart Lardner, and really happy that he was willing to come and share. This man's got deep roots and a lot of experience, and so very interested to hear your take on what you see from the research perspective going forward.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Doug, for that kind introduction. And just a little background, Surya called me up a bit ago and he said, Bart, you have lots of money. Come on over on your own dime and tell us something that we're going to hear about from Saskatchewan. And so knowing Surya for many, many years and collaborating with him, I had to accept the invitation and come and visit with you folks. And so, oh, wow, look at this. It changed the font. Interesting. So yeah, I want to just chat a little bit about what's happening in Saskatchewan and put my spin on where we're at in terms of research and my program in that province, and then certainly, you know, maybe throw a bunch of ideas at you folks in the next little bit here, and then look at you know, which one of these ideas stick. Let's go backwards. Okay. So my whole area is applied cow-calf and forage research, and certainly it's all about looking at programs to you know, put nutrient-dense forages in front of that gestating beef cow, co-products, you name it. The challenges of you know, stressors, cold stress, the challenges of environment, trying to work with cow-calf producers in Saskatchewan, but you know, I've worked with them all across Canada and down in the US. In my mind, it's a North American beef industry. A lot of our work is picked up by the northern US states, and I'm down there talking in Montana, North Dakota many, many times. And so, you know, it's all about getting that cow pregnant and getting that calf on the ground so you have some commodity to sell and service your debt. End of story. The other background is, yeah, I've been around a while, hence the gray hair, and started out at a facility called Western Beef Development Center up there on the left, Lanigan, Saskatchewan. And you know what? Change is inevitable, folks. And so are we ready for it? That's really the challenge, and get ready for change. And in 2018, the industry got together with the ministry, with the university, and so moved our program from Lanigan, Saskatchewan to Clavet, Saskatchewan, where we're housed now. And the neat thing about the Clavet land, 15 quarters of land there, is it never saw a four-legged critter. And so it was the old snow canola rotation. Sorry, I pick on cropping guys here. But you know, what a chance to look at nutrient cycling in a lot of our programs, and you know, grow some forages and put some critters out there and just look at what they're doing. You know, the other part of our equation, and if any folks have heard me speak in the past, it's the economics. And so we try to do a study. Yes, we're gonna grow a widget or a bale of hay or put a calf on the ground, but what's it gonna cost, right? And so that's the applicability of our program, is we're trying to relate to the producer, and we're trying to put that economic spin on it. And my colleague Kathy Larson, whom I've worked with for many, many years, probably 15 plus years, is still working with us. And then certainly, you know, trying to come up with a cost to gain, or a cost per cow per day, to say, okay, you know, if you do this, it's an opportunity. Maybe you can look at integrating it into your farm or your ranch. I just want to back up a bit and talk about our Saskatchewan growth plan. And we met with the minister, I believe, last fall and talked about that. And that's their vision. That's their vision, is to increase crop production to 45 million ton. And the good thing is to increase cash receipts to 3 billion. And so livestock cash receipts. And so, you know what? Increasing the beef industry is all part and parcel. And so how do I enhance that? With my program, Applied Cow-Calf and Forage, that means to integrate those two in my systems approach, applied systems approach research. And obviously forages, perennial annual species, are part of that, you know, throughout the 12 months of the year. And I go back to Dwayne McCartney days, who was a great mentor of mine. And certainly I learned from Dwayne over the years that forages are the backbone of the beef industry. And so how can we enhance that? How can we look at different forage germplasms that are coming through our forage breeding programs, right? And can we test them in the small plot? And then can we test them in the paddock? And that's really where I come in, to just not only look at these capturing carbon sequestration, but now, as Grant alluded to, the pushback the industry is getting in terms of emissions. And so we'll chat about that a little bit. One of those forages that we're looking at is teff. It's a warm season species, and we've come through many years of drought in Saskatchewan, like you folks have. And so, you know, is this an opportunistic forage that we can put out there to just grow some fiber for our critters? Another one there you see on the bottom is forage chicory, and we just established a big grazing study looking at this, integrating with some well-known tame grass and legume species. And some of the benefits that we're hearing about chicory in terms of anthelmintic opportunities there as well. Then I look at the Alberta plan, and I pull this off of your website for Alberta Ag and Forestry. You know, the growth there to invest, you know, attract investment, increase exports, and irrigation's a big buzzword. Irrigation's a buzzword in Saskatchewan. We're hearing that as well. And in my mind, that's opportunity to grow crops, opportunity to grow forages, obviously to attract that amount of investments, increase that number of jobs. And then of course you have ARDAR, which I'm looking at in conversations to collaborate with you Alberta researchers. Alma was a huge support of our program over the years, and so we welcome those opportunities and those conversations. And of course you folks with your 6-pillar strategy. And I look at the people in this room and I go, okay, you know what? Maybe Saskatchewan needs to be in contact with you people and have these conversations. What does the support look like in Saskatchewan? Well, we have Saskatchewan Forage Council, and I chatted with Alan a little bit about putting him in contact with Shannon. It's a no-brainer in my mind. Our own provincial beef association is a huge supporter of forage research and us as research scientists. Then we look at, you know what, we have a really good forage breeder in our province, Dr. Bill Milligatu, Dr. Harry in the back there. We're chatting with him at Lethbridge, right? So in my mind, as a cow-calf forage research scientist, I need to talk to those forage breeders. I need to evaluate the germplasms coming out of their programs and put them in front of a beef cow. We're also very fortunate in that we just hired my PhD student, Bree Kellen, and now Bree is our new forage utilization chair, housed in the plant and a cross appointment between plant and animal poultry science. And I'm kind of mentoring her in the background. Obviously, Bree has to build her own program, but certainly I'm in the shadows. In fact, she just texted me before I started here 2 seconds ago and saying, Bart, I need to run something by you. So Lord knows what that is. Also, our provincial government, we have 10 regional offices, and in those offices are housed a livestock specialist and now an environmental specialist, okay? And so these folks are going to work with producers to implement, you know, BMPs, grazing programs, you name it, as well as the livestock folks. And I've been around long enough. I met with them in Swift Current just about a month ago, and I bet you 60% of them in the room were a student I taught or came through my program. So it's not showing up on the very bottom of that slide. I remember what that was. Oh, I know what the spoke sites, the agri-arm spoke sites. We have 8 of those around the province as well. And so a great addition to doing demo work in a small plot situation. Even though a lot of those are focused on cropping, there is some opportunity there for forages. So I go back quite a ways, back to 1998, and I do 3 things. I teach undergrads and I teach graduate classes. I teach the vet students across the road because they know nothing about nutrition. And I also run a pretty big research program. But the third thing I do is extension. And so since January, I think this is about the 25th to 26th presentation. So I've been on the road quite a bit. I weigh heavily on my technical support people. And I go back to 1998 when we were doing some workshops with Dr. Harlan Hughes. And so as a producer, you look at the step down process. Do you want to just run cows? Do you want to just weigh calves? Do you want to manage by cows? Or do you want to manage by unit cost of production? Okay. This is doing really weird things. I go back to our own cost of production program that was run by Western Beef Development Center, Kathy Larson. And, you know, she looked at low cost producers and high cost producers. And so she looked at the 3 main drivers of cow-calf profitability was optimizing productivity, was to increase pounds weaned per cow, control feed costs, right? On-farm feed costs. And so what would you grow and how would you bring it onto that farm and control fixed costs? Then she looked at, you know what, of all the data gathered over those many years of cost of production with beef producers, she looked at the high cost producers versus the low cost producers and what were they doing differently? Well, they were lowering winter feed costs. They were putting that ruminant out in the field, implementing extended grazing programs, grazing longer throughout the summer and the fall, as well as larger herd sizes, weaning, getting a higher wean percentage. And so what they didn't chintz on or cut corners on was how they managed pasture, how they managed forages, okay? Their bulb battery, herd health, vaccination programs. And so spending less on these items would certainly raise costs. And so that's just and those fact sheets were looked at by funding lending institutions, so Farm Credit Corporation, because that data is not out there, folks. It's missing data. Alberta's doing some work right now, I believe, or did in the past, but in my mind, that's a program that needs to come back. You look at all the enterprises on an operation, okay? You have your cow-calf, you have your hay, you have your backgrounders, your replacements, and your pasture areas. And each one of these enterprises, there's a huge opportunity to integrate forages. And so, you look at that and you create, what are the novel forages that I could integrate onto my farm or my ranch? And I talk about this to many, many organizations and producers, and just don't do what dad did or what the neighbor's doing down the road, trying to manage crested wheatgrass year round. Look at the new varieties that are coming down the pipe, a blend of annual and perennial forages. And so, yeah, absolutely. Can we extend the grazing season? Because we know the forages are the backbone of the beef industry. And can we graze as many days of the year, just to steal Grant's thunder and Dwayne's thunder? So the other thing I was busy doing for the last 3 years is the drought. And so we have a lot of challenges in our province. Lots of ranches have been dealing with 4 years of drought. But 2021 was a very busy year, doing tons of workshops, and in that it was a lockdown. So I got to know Zoom and Teams down pat. And so it's a frustrating situation, and many folks were in dire situation. They had to go out and gather information from many different resources. They had to make that hard decision. Is there a potential to put in maybe a salvage crop or emergency crop? Usually it was an annual crop, or the ability to work with a neighbor, right? Getting that cropping guy. Maybe I can go and utilize that cash crop that turned into a salvage crop. And absolutely, there is that opportunity, and to have that plan B. And so I spent a lot of my time looking at different fiber options for these producers that were in really, really difficult situations, because depopulation of the herd was the last thing they wanted to do, right? They spent decades building that herd up, and to have to depopulate was very, very stressful. And so we talked a lot about drought-stressed small grain cereal crops. We talked about grazing canola and the anti-quality issues around that, and flax, lentils, you name it. Kochia is a fiber, right? Oxalates are an issue, but guess what? It's a fiber, and we can put it in front of a beef cow. And then we talked about a lot of that slough hay, a lot of that ditch hay, right? And the issues of weeds and some of the anti-quality factors, being aware of that, managing and monitoring, and dilute. And so obviously, as on the drought situation, can we put something in on the cereal side, on the cool season side, maybe on the warm season side? And we've done a ton of research on all of these species in our program at Western Beef and now LFCE. And so, put them in the ground, and 4 or 5, 6 weeks later, we get something to graze. That's a good thing. And I fall back to the winter cereal program. It's a great crop where you can put something in. It won't go to seed head, and 6 weeks later you get something to graze. In fact, fall rye will act like a biennial. And so we've evaluated a lot of those early fall varieties, looking at now some of the hybrid fall varieties that are out there in our program. So, my program is focusing on now, when I started 25 plus years ago, now it's getting closer to 30, I was just doing a study where we'd actually look at some of the indices would be performance indicators. So the value of the cow, the growth of the calf, the pounds of hay we'd get off that acre of land, or tons of hay we'd get off that acre of land. Now my program shifted to the environmental impact. And so you see up there, animal, plant, soil, water interfaces. And so can we evaluate these new forages that are coming down the pipe in terms of, do they persist after we establish them? We're paying a lot of money to put them in, right? Are they gone after 1 or 2 years? That's huge. Is there degradability? Are they nutrient dense to that critter? When does she need that high energy, high protein, right? In terms of gestation or even a growing 5-weight calf. Are those nutrients available? So working with my other colleagues in the department and looking at, extensive systems. Can we actually raise our replacements in a replacement program, a development program for 200+ days on a diet they're going to see for the next 10 or 12 years of their life, right? And still get pregnant, instead of putting them into a dry lot pen and feeding them silage, alfalfa, and DDG, and say, hey, guess what? You're never going to see that diet again. We want them to get pregnant on crop residues or extensive grazing. The other thing I've done is teamed up with our soil scientists, our engineers, our nutritionists, and looking at all these things like soil dynamics, moisture, carbon change, nectaric emissions. And as I said, you know what? I've been asked by Regina to look at the impact, or trying to ways to mitigate the impact of the industry on the environment. That's just a snapshot of all the species we've looked at over the years. You can see the perennials on the left and the annuals on the right. And we continue to look at new ones coming down the pipe. Like I said, teff grass, chicory, some of the annual legumes, right? And so do they establish where we are and how do they fit into the program? We talked about this last night, right? All the N kicking around. Let's grab it. Let's put that legume in a rotation system. It's kind of a no-brainer to marry up livestock and legumes. And so we're doing some of that. Here's a study that I did with Paul Jefferson, who's now retired, but certainly a really interesting study is that what if we grew a legume crop for only a 2-year period? And let's say, you know what, maybe let's compare red clover to alfalfa. And are there soil zone differences? And can we calculate fertilizer savings if we do this? And we did that at 4 different sites. You can see the brown soil, Swift, dark brown was Saskatoon, Lanigan, the thin black, dark brown, and Melfort, certainly really good grain country up there, that black soil zone. And we had 4 different rotations. So there you can see the 4 rotations. The top 2 were that short rotation forage legume, okay? The alfalfa on the top, the red clover, the second one. And rotation 3, we brought in that pulse in year 2. You can see the P. And the 4th rotation was simply a cropping rotation, growing a cash crop, okay? So I don't want to spend a lot of time. I'll go right to the results on this particular study, and you can see the difference in value or calculated fertilizer equivalent over that 2-year period. You see that what worked really well in that black soil zone, it was the alfalfa, right? A plow down green manure. Red clover, surprisingly, in that thin black, dark brown soil zone came out a winner. Something to look at, something to think about. Swift current, never rains there. So it didn't work very well, okay? But the benefits of a rotation system bringing in a legume, huge. This is another long-term study I've been involved with way back since 2017 when we secured that property at Clavette, Saskatchewan. As I said, it was just a canola snow rotation. We went in there and we established 4 different systems. We were comparing in this system 2 perennial versus 2 annual. And as scientists, I see Dr. Bork in the back of the room, we're limited by the number of treatments that we can put into play. We'd love to put 4 or 5 or 12 different treatments, but we're limited. And the more I look at this over the last 5-6 years, we've had it in on test. I'd love to have had 2 or 3 more different species out there, but we're limited by the planning that we do 5, 6, 7 years ago. So obviously we have our perennials is good old meadow brome and sandfoin. You'd like that, Surya. We have our hybrid with our alfalfa, and our annuals are a fall rye clover. Okay, so an annual clover there. And of course, the other one is a very simple cover crop mix, okay? What are we looking at? Well, again, it makes sense for us to team with all these specialists. So obviously forage biomass and quality. This particular study, we have 2 master's students on. The no-brainers are performance and emissions, soil characteristics with Dr. Jeff Shano in his lab, soil water balance with Dr. Fonstad in engineering in his lab, and of course, soil microbial communities with Dr. Helgeson, Bobby Helgeson in her lab. So let's look at what's going on above, below both not just rooting, but also moisture cycling, but also emissions coming off the critters. And of course, economics with Kathy. I just want to pick the eyes out of this and just talk briefly about one of these measures, and that was soil moisture. And we established this in 2018. Our drought years were 2019 and 2020. So we went out there with Terry Fonstad and his crew. Actually, Crystal Reines did the elements of amount of work, and we buried these moisture sensors in each of our paddocks, okay? And you can see the different depths from 0.2 down to 1.5 meter depth. And so we're following through the rain patterns over those successive years and say, guess what? Can we come away and find out which one of these systems is better equipped to mitigate the impacts of drought? So Jordan Salmons is going to be my new grad student going on this study. It's her job to mine that mountain of data and come away with some implications. And so I just show some fall rye, Berseem clover paddocks there. And you can see the movement of the water below ground, and the points are actually biomass yield. And the other one here is the Meadowbrome sandfoin. Again, the movement of moisture below ground, and the points again are biomass yield. And just a brief summary is our biomass followed moisture events. And so, you know, really which one of these 4 treatments best responded to that limited rainfall in those drought years going forward. The other thing, and I'm going to pick on the Forage folks in this room who've been a long part of that, is how do we evaluate forages? How do we evaluate the applicability or the adaptation of these varieties that we're being asked to put onto our farm or our ranch in terms of long-term or short-term? And you know, if you go back, a lot of the seed companies not required to perform grazing trials. Yes, it's very costly. And in Saskatchewan, we had variety test program for many years. That was cut. So how do we feel confident that we're buying that mix? It's actually going to germinate and actually going to persist over the long term. And there I cite some elder statesmen of the world, Shabtai and Dwayne. And you know what? We look in Saskatchewan, and a lot of the actual recommendations are pretty darned old data, like stuff I did back in '98, for crying out loud. And so, you know, and we look at, okay, maybe we can put it into the ground, and maybe let's actually look at which one of these species the critters actually will consume or graze. Because I've had a lot of studies go where I thought the animals would eat lots of that, but they told me a different story. They actually did not like to utilize that particular crop. We're going to measure the typical indices in this particular study. This is Cassidy Sims' master's work, obviously biomass and nutritive value. We seeded down 20 different treatments in this particular study. In a smorgasbord situation, we had 3 blocks of 13 acres, and we put a high stock density out there. And then we're obviously not only measuring biomass, nutritive value, but we're also measuring ED-related growth. What is ED-related growth? Growth without sunlight, right? So it's a direct correlation with the amount of carbohydrate reserves that might be in those roots and in that crown of that plant. The ability of that plant to respond after a vigorous grazing the previous year over winter and come into the spring and actually produce some biomass. And so a no-brainer way of measuring it. I did that way back in my graduate studies. And so I've had a couple of my students look at it. It's just you cover the tuft and you measure the growth without sunlight. The other thing we were looking at was obviously grazing preference. And so how did we do that? We did it a couple of ways. We did it with the UAVs or the drones, dubbed Wilson 2 because Wilson 1 flew off into the sunset. My grad student has a really good story for that one. I had a very interesting phone call coming back from Red Deer one day. And the other way is a visual observation, right? So modified one that I did many years ago down at Outlook. And so, yeah, we went out there early in the morning, early at night, and we're just counting the number of critters. And so on top of that, actually, you can see the tagged animals that are out there. Cass was looking at shy versus bold animals and trying to say, you know what, maybe bold animals are going to go seek those more luscious species quicker, sooner, more often than the shy animals. What did that look like? Well, when we established this site, it didn't rain, right? And so we're no different than you as producers, trying to put forages in when it doesn't rain. And so you can see that our average precip there was 340. In the year we tried to seed it was 208. I was also being quite stubborn, and I tried to put in bird's foot trefoil and sisal milk vetch, but neither one of those two treatments came up, Syria. So we dealt with 14 treatments versus 20. This is just the biomass over the 2-year period, and you can see all the treatments there. And we go back to Coleman suggesting that 2,000 kilo per hectare would be probably adequate biomass that would support grazing animals, okay? And you look at the bar, okay, which ones actually met that? And you can see that actually the alfalfas came out a winner, good old queen of the forages. There's your sandfoin number 4 there, Syria. And way over on the right is the Killarney orchard grass, which did not do very well because I've done some work with Kay previously. It had challenges in overwintering, and I thought Killarney was going to be the ticket, but it just didn't do very well in that drought establishment year. Oh, here's the energy content, okay? And so it ranged from 58 to about 63 in terms of TDN. And we look at what does a 350 kilo animal need, according to NASEM 2016, about 61 to 63. And so which one of these species actually met that? Most of the alfalfas were the ones that met that. And sandfoin. What about etiolated growth? Well, you know what, similar results to some previous work we've done. And you look at the bottom there, the total, and you look at which one is the winner, 39.5 for meadowbrome grass. Okay, not surprising because it really is a pasture-based species. And the alfalfas, the 1, 2, 3 on the left actually came through. In fact, after the first 2 weeks, 34% of the growth occurred on the etiolated growth. And after 56 days, most of that growth had taken place. The two that we chose on the legume side was the Cronus that taprooted, had the greatest of the legume alfalfas, and of course, meadowbrome came through compared to that orchard grass. There's our preference ranking. That's what the animals liked. So that was what was available for biomass, and that was available for good nutritive value. That's where they congregated and they grazed most often. They just weren't going to that Killarney orchard grass on the bottom. And you can see the binary mixtures in the middle. You know, pick one of them, which one would work for you on your farm or your ranch. So that's just a snippet of some of the work that we're doing. Now we're going to get to the good stuff, and that's cover crops. Where do they fit? Where do they fit in a program along with the swath graze, the bale graze, stockpile forage, all the corn grazing you see there? And so, you know, all I'm hearing in my travels is the synergy between the cropping and the livestock. And that those cropping guys that are farming 10,000 acres, we need to convince them that putting a ruminant on their acre of land at some point in time is a good thing. These things are nutrient cyclers. They're upcyclers, right? And I hear that down in Montana. I hear that in North Dakota. I hear that in Manitoba. And so how do we convince those cropping guys that it's a good thing to come behind that combine? And some combines throw more over the back than others. So that's a good thing. But you look at the amount of nutrients that are coming out of the back end, tremendous amount of nutrients, okay? So how do we take that nutrient dense, or sorry, that nutrient deficient acre of land on our farm or our ranch and putting that animal out there over a period of time? There's the cover crop story, soil health, yep. Multi-species together, a lot of claims there, biodiversity, soil health, all these things. There's 4 functional groups, people, right? You got your annual legumes, your cools, your worms, and your brassicas. And I think the jury is still out on what blend or what mix should be in there. And of course, the pulse is out there and the cereal should be in there. And this is some of the work we did with Jackie some time ago. We're just trying to get that work published as we speak. And the other work that we just started last fall with Shelby Robinson. And so in this particular study, we have a simple and a complex compared to a monoculture. And in this case, it's haymaker oat with that simple 4 species compared to that complex 8 species. You can see we're measuring Yeoman's amount of data there, biomass quality, cow performance, enteric emissions. In fact, this is some of that living lab work that we've done. We've actually captured some of the first enteric emission work on a fall and winter grazing program with beef cattle. We're also teamed up with those Lethbridge Ag Canada people. Yes, we get along with Ag Canada. Okay, so we have those folks coming, Trevor, coming over and bringing his 80 covariance flux towers. And so we're trying to compare the data we get off of our own green feeder estimations of enteric emissions with these 80 covariance towers. Going back to Jackie's data, you know, what happened below ground? I think we need to study that more. We heard about that, go below that 6 inches of depth. And so we asked our student to go out and take root slabs, wash those roots, and give us an estimate of root yield with our barley monoculture compared to our polycrop. And you can see that the yield was much greater on the polycrops compared to the monoculture fibrous barley. And then we saw, okay, a change in total soil organic carbon in those carbon deficient areas, okay? And this is working with Jeff Shano's lab, and how can we explain that? The greatest increase on the upslope, polycrop upslope, and it was better explained by the patterns of below ground plant biomass than above ground plant biomass. And so you need to know what's going on below ground versus what's going on above ground. I just want to finish a little bit about where my program is going and why I find myself in front of audiences and defending the industry and talking about some of the facts, and that don't forget that the ruminant animal evolved under grazing the Northern Great Plains under low quality, high fibrous feeds, right? And yeah, you know what, there's a lot of critters here long before the cattle herds came here. And so we don't need to forget about that going forward. And I steal this from Dr. Mittelleiner, is how you say his name, Frank Mittelleiner from UC Davis. And you know what, you look at this biogenic carbon cycle, and guess what? The CH4 that's emitted by that critter goes up in the atmosphere. Every 8 to 10 years, it's converted back from CH4 to CO2, taken up by the plants and cycled back up to more biomass for the critters to graze. And that's a story I think the industry needs to tell more and more and more. Why? Because you know what? It's a good news story compared to where do those fossil fuels go and why are we getting the finger pointed at us? So ironically, my program is going out there trying to not only measure the carbon fluxes below ground with our soil scientists, but now we're measuring enteric emissions. How do we do that? 2 techniques. This is the SF6 technique, right? So we strap these beautiful little collars on these critters, give them a perm tube in the rumen, and you know, adaptation period, and away we go. A very intense collection period. Court, I think you were part of that? No, you didn't do that. You were gone. Okay. And we do that, and we also do the other more expensive technique. There's our SF6 technique with these guys. These are called green feeders. They're out of Rapid City, South Dakota. Very expensive. And so we lure the critter to this trailer with a little pellet treat. We make sure his head's in that chamber for a 2 or 3 minute period. We can get that level of CO2, CH4 in real time if he keeps his head in that chamber for a 2 or 3 minute period. So we correlate one or we validate one against the other. So, you know, where's our program going? It's looking at trying to graze high quality vegetative forage. It's looking at more integration of legumes in our pasture systems. And we're looking at a number of different substrates, okay, that we can supplement to the critter to maybe reduce those emissions. And obviously the legumes are part of that. You like this, Syria, our Sandfoin and Sicer slide. And I'd be amiss if I didn't mention sod seeding. And we've been asked to look at this many, many times. Bree's PhD work is based on this. I was just down in Val-Marie, Saskatchewan, in that real hard ranchland country. They've come through 4 years of drought. They are relying on the crested wheatgrass that's out there for grazing, not the native range. It's that good old crested wheatgrass been pulling them through. And so obviously sod seeding, this is a study that Surya and I started many years ago, comparing Sandfoin with Sicer. And of course, we looked at steer growth as well as methane emissions. And we continue to do that stuff in planning with some of Bree Kellen's program going forward. So sod seeding, it's part of the Living Lab story, right? We have some grants in there. Hopefully we can see they're going to be supported. And, you know, I'm just going to finish up. And I think that you as producers are probably the most sustainable individuals. You're not getting that recognition. Your objective there is to leave those resources behind for the next generation in better condition than when you inherited them. And, you know, we go to the pushback of emissions coming from the beef industry. You can see the level there. Do they really figure into that argument? I don't know. But me as a scientist, I'm trying to gather that information for those producers. And of course, as forage and beef cattle to the environment, the importance of that is all of that pasture land across Western Canada. And you folks who have control of it, you're utilizing low quality forage, making it into some saleable product. You're removing carbon from the atmosphere and storing it in the plant matter. You're enhancing wildlife habitat. Keep going. Marginal land from erosion. Okay, so I think we need to work with more producers going forward and trying to implement some of those studies. There's my website. You can click on there. I guess you could shut me off after 3 minutes. You could not do that this afternoon. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Bart. Well, I think we're up for a quick break now, and then we'll get back at it. And you're going to have your chance to question and probe these guys a little bit at the end of the next two speeches. So we've got our next speakers in the room. So I think we're 10-minute break here, and then we'll